Good afternoon. We are team number 3 and we will talk about DNA. To be more specific, we will talk about the main ideas as well as the important details of DNA. Its composition, structure, functions, and of course, also a three-dimensional model made. Finally, showing a conclusion with enough correct and coherent arguments about the importance of genetics. As we will know, DNA is a molecule which stores genetic information of living beings, as well as some viruses. In addition, it is also responsible for its transmission, as well as giving the necessary instructions for the proper functioning of living organisms. As I mentioned earlier, the function of DNA is to store information in order to build other components such as proteins and RNA molecules. DNA is found within a compartmentalized area within the cells called the nucleus. It is very important not to confuse DNA and RNA, although both are necessary for life, because although DNA is what contains genetic information, RNA is what allows it to be understood by cells. This is why that both work together for the transmission of genetic information.
Now we will show you the next or three-dimensional model of DNA, in which we represent accurately, simple, and clear the chemical composition of each of the parts that settle it, and in turn show the relationship that exists between them, its function, and finally has all this affected in the formation of the structure of the nucleic acid. We will begin by explaining one of the most important parts of the DNA structure, in which almost most of the chemical processes present in these acids are found. The sugar phosphate, which is mentioned, has the presence of two elements that are very important explained below. This is divided into two strands that are not parallel. While the strand is 3 and 5, the other strand is 5 and 3. These ends have only one different characteristic. That end that is represented with the number 5, we always end on the start depending on the strand with a phosphate molecule, while that end that is we represent with the number 3 start to end with a deoxyribose sugar, two different compounds in which we will talk below. Inside and around the strand of the skeleton, we have nucleoids. These are the fundamental units that make the DNA. In this, we find three different molecules that are present during the entire length of the deoxyribonucleic acid. We will begin by explaining the first one. It can be composed of 4 different nucleic bases that are present in most of the DNA structure. They are the adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, which have a minimum of nitrogen atom, which will be important in the definition of the other molecules. These are united with a specific pattern, because only adenine may be attached with the base of the thymine, and guanine can only be attached with the base of the cytosine. All these need hydrogen bonds that are between each one of the base parts. This can be divided into different types. The so-called purines that have 2 carbon rings in which adenine and guanine are found, and the pyrimines which have only 1 carbon ring in which thymine and cytosine are found. From the difference of the rings of each base, it can be known because of the connection order of the base, since 2 bases with 2 rings cannot be linked. This combined with antiparallelity of DNA strands are the factors that cause because this acid has that form of the propeller.
As a second molecule, there is a sugar with a ring of 5 carbons, called deoxyribose, which is responsible for the union of the 4 bases that were previously mentioned. With the skeleton sugar phosphate functioning as a connection between them, this forms the connecting the carbon to the sugar located in the order of the clock handles and the nitrogen atom of the base. Finally, the phosphate molecule is found, which has a diester bond, or in other words, has 2 oxygen bonds, one by each deoxyribose molecule, specifically in carbon 3. In case of being in the behind of the phosphate, or in carbon 5 in the case of being in the front. All of these form a numbering order to the clock hands. The latter serves as a support for the union to the next nucleotide that is formed by another set of phosphate, deoxyribose, and base molecules. From these last 2 molecules, the DNA skeleton obtains its name, since within them there is a connection of multiple molecules of phosphate and deoxyribose sugar that in turn are linked to various bases and its sets.
Genetics help us explain a lot of phenomena, from what makes us unique to why some diseases such as diabetes or cancers run in families. We are all considered unique because we all have different genes. All instructions are different. We all have 2 copies of almost all genes, one from our mother and one from our father. Genes are found in chromosomes, which are the basis of DNA. This is key to understand why we inherit some characteristics for our parents. Because of this, we have some similar traits. To develop the disease, recessive mutation needs 2 copies of the mutation. Recessive genetic disease don't usually occur in all generations of an affected family. The parents of an affected person are usually carriers, people who have a copy of a mutated gene but are not affected. If both parents carry the same mutated gene and both pass it on their child, then the child is affected.
Diseases caused by mutations in a single gene are usually passed on genetically in a simple pattern, depending on the location of the gene and whether 1 or 2 normal copies of the gene are needed. This is commonly referred to as Mendelian inheritance, as it was Gregor Mendel who first discovered these patterns in pea plants. Such single-gene disorders are weird. This was the basis for contemporary researchers to formulate the so-called inheritance patterns, which are mainly divided into 5 types. The autosomal dominant, in which each person usually has 1 affected parent and usually occurs in all generations. Autosomal recessive, in which both parents are carriers and it doesn't usually occur in all generations. The X-dominant pattern, which is usually more common in females, as it's said to affect all females, but no males will be affected. Although, if the female parent has problems, it is just as likely to occur, regardless of sex. The X-recessive pattern, in which the opposite happens, and the most affected are men in all generations. Finally, we have the mitochondrial pattern that affects men and women equally, because all mitochondria comes from their mothers and can occur in all generations.
With the information presented and explained above, we conclude our learning evidence in the best way. Thank you for your attention.